It was a regular Monday morning at Lincoln High, the kind of day where the hum of students talking, lockers slamming, and sneakers squeaking across the floor blended into the usual chaos. In Mrs. Reynolds' classroom, the chatter had died down as she walked to the front, carrying a stack of freshly graded exams. The room smelled faintly of pencils and erasers, the air heavy with the nervous energy that always came when grades were about to be handed back. Among the students sitting at their desks was a boy named Elijah. He was quiet, the kind of student who didn't call attention to himself. He wore a faded hoodie and jeans, and he often sat in the back corner, keeping to himself. Teachers sometimes overlooked him, assuming he was just another face in the crowd. But Elijah had a mind that absorbed everything, a kind of focus that was rare. He didn't need to speak loudly to be noticed because when it came to understanding, he spoke volumes through his work. Mrs. Reynolds began handing out the exams, her face slightly tight as she moved down the aisle. Some students immediately glanced at their papers with relief or disappointment, whispering to each other. A few let out small groans, disappointed with the grades they received. Elijah took his paper with a calm expression, glancing at it quietly. He already knew his score, but he maintained a polite and modest attitude, not wanting to stir attention. As Mrs. Reynolds handed out the last few papers, she paused. Her eyes landed on Elijah's exam. Her brow furrowed slightly. She picked up his paper, pretending to review the others first, but she couldn't resist sneaking a peek. And then when she looked, she nearly dropped the paper. The score was the highest in the entire class. Her initial reaction was disbelief. How could Elijah, the quiet boy at the back, possibly outscore every other student? Mrs. Reynolds cleared her throat, trying to maintain her composure. She handed the paper back to Elijah with a tight smile. The rest of the class had begun murmuring, noticing her hesitation. Elijah simply nodded and placed the exam on his desk. He didn't say anything, knowing that his work would speak for itself. A few students whispered to each other, some expressing surprise. "I didn't know he was that good," one student said. Another nodded, saying, "Yeah, he's smart, but this is way higher than anyone expected." Elijah listened quietly, not responding. He didn't need to. He had always believed that results mattered more than words. Mrs. Reynolds, however, could not let it go. She asked Elijah to come to the front of the class. Elijah walked calmly, his steps measured, as other students glanced at him with curiosity. He had seen this before, the skepticism, the doubt, but he never let it bother him. He stood in front of the teacher, waiting for her to speak. Mrs. Reynolds looked down at his exam, her lips pressed tightly together. "Elijah," she began, her voice firm but tinged with doubt. "Are you sure this score is correct?" "I mean, it's unusual," Elijah nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am." "I double-checked my answers." She frowned, glancing at the top of the paper again. The numbers didn't lie. He had scored higher than anyone else. Still, her disbelief lingered. "I don't know. Maybe there was a mistake in grading," she said, trying to find a way to dismiss it. Elijah remained calm, his voice steady. "If you'd like, we can go through it together, question by question." The classroom went quiet. A few students exchanged glances, impressed by his poise. Mrs. Reynolds hesitated, then reluctantly agreed. She didn't expect to find anything different, but she wanted to be thorough. She motioned for Elijah to start explaining his answers. As they went through the first question, Elijah explained his reasoning clearly. He walked through each step slowly, making it easy to follow. Mrs. Reynolds listened, her frown deepening. Every answer he provided was accurate, showing a depth of understanding she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just correct. It was thoughtful, precise, and well-reasoned. By the time they reached the middle of the exam, Mrs. Reynolds was quiet, her initial skepticism melting into reluctant acknowledgement. Elijah's explanations were clear, logical, and confident. He didn't boast or act superior. He simply shared what he knew. Some students started leaning forward in their seats, watching closely. They could see that this wasn't a fluke. It was the result of real skill and understanding. The teacher's disbelief slowly turned into surprise, and then into a kind of awkward respect. She realized that she had underestimated him, judging him based on her assumptions rather than his abilities. Elijah had always been capable, but her bias had blinded her to that fact. She had expected him to do well, perhaps, but not to surpass everyone else in the class. When they finished reviewing the exam, Mrs. Reynolds looked at Elijah again. Her expression had softened, though a hint of embarrassment remained. I see now, she said quietly. You really did earn this score. I misjudged you. Elijah smiled faintly, nodding. Thank you, ma'am. I just focused on the work. The classroom remained silent for a moment. Then a few students began whispering excitedly, some even clapping softly. They admired not only his intelligence but also his calm, respectful demeanor. Elijah had proven himself without needing to boast or draw attention. His success was visible to everyone, but he remained humble. As the class continued, Mrs. Reynolds handed back the remaining exams, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She reflected on her reaction, realizing that her disbelief had been unfair. She had let assumptions cloud her judgment. Watching Elijah handle the situation with grace and clarity had left an impression she could not ignore. It was a lesson in humility, one she would carry with her beyond this single classroom experience. Elijah returned to his seat quietly, placing his exam on the desk. He didn't need to announce his success. His classmates had seen it and his work spoke for itself. Some of them approached him after class, congratulating him with sincere smiles and words of encouragement. He thanked them politely, his focus already shifting to the next challenge, the next subject, the next opportunity to prove himself through effort rather than words. The day went on, but the memory of that moment lingered. For Mrs. Reynolds, it was a moment of reflection, a recognition of bias and a reminder that talent and effort could come from unexpected places. For Elijah, it was another confirmation that quiet determination and focus could achieve remarkable things, even when others doubted him. By the time the final bell rang, the classroom had settled into its usual rhythm, but the impact of that morning was clear. Students left the room talking not just about the grades, but about respect, humility, and the power of perseverance. Mrs. Reynolds watched them leave, her mind still replaying the review of Elijah's exam. She knew she had learned something important. Never underestimate someone based on appearances or assumptions. Elijah packed his bag quietly, slipping out the door with the same calm, unassuming demeanor he always carried. He didn't need recognition or praise. He knew his abilities, and he had proven without a doubt that he could excel. The classroom had witnessed it, the teacher had witnessed it, and perhaps most importantly, Elijah had shown himself that dedication, focus, and confidence could overcome even the highest levels of doubt. As he walked down the hallway, students giving him nods of acknowledgement, he felt the quiet satisfaction of accomplishment. He didn't boast and he didn't need to. The result was undeniable, the respect was earned, and the lesson for the teacher and for the class was clear. Talent, determination, and focus could not be denied no matter how unexpected they might appear. The day after the exam, the classroom felt different. The usual energy was still there, students chatting and moving about, but a quiet curiosity had taken root. Many of them had talked about Elijah's score, and whispers filled the halls about how he had outperformed everyone. Some students admired him while others were genuinely surprised, but Elijah, as always, remained calm. He did not let the attention change him. He focused on his work, writing in his notebook quietly, solving problems, and preparing for the next lesson. Mrs. Reynolds entered the room with a more serious expression than usual. She had spent the evening reviewing Elijah's paper again, thinking about her reaction and her initial disbelief. The experience had left her reflecting on her own assumptions and biases. Today, she was determined to handle the situation differently, but she still struggled with a mix of pride and embarrassment. Pride because Elijah's work was outstanding, and embarrassment because she had doubted him so openly. As the students settled into their seats, Mrs. Reynolds cleared her throat. She addressed the class, her voice firm but more careful than usual. Yesterday we reviewed Elijah's exam, she said. I want to acknowledge that he did very well. It was an excellent score, and I think we can all learn from the way he approached the work. The class reacted with soft applause. Some students looked at Elijah, nodding and smiling. Others were whispering excitedly to each other, clearly impressed. Elijah looked down at his desk and gave a small nod in acknowledgement, his quiet humility evident. He didn't seek attention, and yet the recognition seemed natural and deserved. As the lesson began, Mrs. Reynolds decided to incorporate a new approach. She asked the students to form small groups and work on a challenging problem, similar to the one on the exam. Elijah joined a group with a few classmates who had performed well, but who were struggling with confidence. He explained his reasoning patiently, breaking down each step clearly. The students in his group listened attentively, following his logic and learning not just the answers but the method behind them. His quiet leadership encouraged others to participate and share their ideas without fear of being wrong. Mrs. Reynolds observed from her desk, noticing how Elijah's influence was helping the group. She realized that his value went beyond scoring well. He had the ability to teach and inspire others. She began to see that the earlier doubts were not about his intelligence, but about her own limited expectations. This recognition made her more aware of how she treated other students and how often she might have underestimated their potential based on appearances or stereotypes. During the group activity, a student in Elijah's group struggled with one of the problems. She looked frustrated and on the verge of giving up. Elijah leaned over and spoke softly, guiding her through the thought process without giving her the answer outright. He asked questions that led her to think critically, helping her arrive at the solution herself. When she finally understood and solved the problem, her eyes lit up, and she smiled at him with gratitude. The moment was small, but it was significant. It showed that success was not just about personal achievement, but also about helping others grow. The bell rang for lunch, and students filed out of the room, still talking about the exam and Elijah's score. Elijah packed his bag slowly, not rushing, knowing he would see his friends in the cafeteria. Mrs. Reynolds stayed behind for a moment, reflecting on the morning. She realized she needed to confront her own biases more openly and teach the students that intelligence and effort were not defined by appearances or assumptions. She wanted to make sure that every student felt capable of achieving their best if they applied themselves. After lunch, a few students approached Elijah in the hallway. They wanted to understand how he studied, how he prepared, and what motivated him. He spoke calmly, explaining his study habits and the importance of focusing on understanding rather than memorizing. He emphasized patience, practice, and paying attention in class. His words were simple, but the students listened intently. They realized that success was not just a matter of luck or natural talent, but of dedication and careful work. Word of Elijah's achievement had begun to spread beyond the classroom. Other teachers noticed his performance, and some even mentioned it in passing to their classes. This created a ripple effect, inspiring other students to take their studies more seriously. They saw that someone they considered quiet or ordinary could achieve extraordinary results with focus and persistence. The story of his exam score became more than a single accomplishment. It became a symbol of what was possible when effort met opportunity. As the week progressed, Mrs. Reynolds continued to reflect on her reactions. She realized that her disbelief was rooted in unconscious bias, something she hadn't wanted to acknowledge before. She also realized that she had an opportunity to teach a larger lesson, the importance of fairness, recognition, and encouragement. She began to call on students more equally in class, offering guidance and praise where it was due, and encouraging those who might otherwise have been overlooked. Elijah noticed the change in the classroom environment as well. Students who had been hesitant to participate began sharing their ideas more freely. Some students who had struggled before started asking questions and exploring solutions with more confidence. Elijah didn't try to take credit. He simply continued to do his work and support others when needed. His calm, steady presence helped create an atmosphere where effort and understanding were valued over appearances or preconceptions. One afternoon, during a particularly challenging lesson, a student asked a question that stumped most of the class. Elijah quietly explained the concept step by step, showing how to approach the problem from different angles. The student's eyes brightened as she understood the solution. The small victory brought applause from nearby classmates, and Mrs. Reynolds felt a sense of pride in seeing the growth happening before her eyes. She realized that learning was not just about grades, but about cultivating understanding and confidence in every student. By the end of the week, the dynamic in the classroom had shifted noticeably. Students were more engaged, more willing to take risks in their learning, and more supportive of one another. Mrs. Reynolds recognized that she had learned an important lesson herself, that every student has the potential to excel, and that it is her role as a teacher to nurture that potential, not to judge or underestimate it. Elijah continued to navigate the classroom quietly, his focus always on learning and helping where he could. He didn't need accolades, but he received them naturally through the respect and admiration of his peers. His journey was a reminder to everyone around him that quiet determination, humility, and consistent effort could create powerful change, both personally and for the community. The week ended with a small celebration of understanding and achievement. Mrs. Reynolds addressed the class, praising their efforts and highlighting moments of growth, while also acknowledging the importance of fairness and open-mindedness. Elijah remained seated listening quietly, proud not only of his own accomplishment, but of the positive impact his work had on others. As students left the classroom for the weekend, many reflected on the lessons they had learned, not just in academics but in life. They had seen how assumptions could be misleading, how patience and focus could lead to success, and how supporting one another could create a better environment for everyone. For Elijah, it had been another week of proving quietly and steadily that dedication and understanding mattered most, and that true achievement often went beyond the numbers on a paper. A few weeks after the exam, the classroom had settled into a more positive rhythm. Students were working harder and helping one another more openly, encouraged by what they had seen from Elijah. His influence had created a subtle shift. Teachers noticed it, classmates noticed it, and even Elijah himself could sense that the energy in the room was different. He didn't seek recognition, but his consistency and quiet leadership had a powerful effect. One morning, Mrs. Reynolds entered the room with a new set of assignments. She had designed a challenging project that required critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity. The class buzzed with nervous excitement, knowing that it would test not only their knowledge but also their ability to work together. She explained the instructions carefully, emphasizing that the goal was to solve the problems thoughtfully, not just quickly. Elijah was assigned to a group with 3 students who had been struggling academically. At first, they looked uncertain, clearly intimidated by his presence, but Elijah approached them calmly, smiling in reassurance. He explained that everyone had strengths and weaknesses, and that by working together they could achieve a better result. His confidence was not overbearing. It was steady and encouraging, creating trust instantly. The group began to work, and soon obstacles emerged. One student struggled to understand a concept, another hesitated to contribute ideas, and the third kept second-guessing every answer. Elijah patiently guided them, asking questions that encouraged critical thinking rather than giving the answers outright. He showed them how to break problems into smaller steps, how to approach difficult questions from multiple angles, and how to rely on each other's strengths. As the class watched, it became clear that Elijah's guidance was making a difference. The students in his group started to participate more actively, offering suggestions and solving problems with greater confidence. The atmosphere in the classroom shifted further, a mix of concentration, curiosity, and encouragement filling the space. Mrs. Reynolds observed quietly, realizing that Elijah's impact extended beyond his own achievements. He was helping others grow, and that growth was transforming the classroom. At one point, a particularly challenging problem came up that had stumped everyone. Elijah's group paused, looking uncertain. He leaned in, speaking softly and clearly, guiding them through a process of reasoning that helped them approach the problem step by step. Slowly, they began to understand, and finally, they arrived at the correct solution together. The sense of accomplishment in the group was palpable. Smiles spread across their faces, and even Mrs. Reynolds felt a rush of pride and surprise at what had just been accomplished. The day continued with similar moments, each small success reinforcing the lessons of persistence, collaboration, and careful thinking. By the end of the class, many students were more engaged than they had ever been, participating willingly, asking questions, and even helping one another. The environment had become more inclusive, supportive, and respectful. Elijah's presence and quiet guidance had inspired this change, and the classroom was feeling the results. After class, some students approached Elijah to ask for advice. They wanted to know how he managed to stay calm under pressure, how he approached studying, and how he solved problems with such clarity. He answered simply, explaining that he focused on understanding the material rather than memorizing it. practiced regularly, and tried to learn from mistakes rather than fear them. His humility made his advice accessible and practical, encouraging others to try the same approach. Mrs. Reynolds stayed behind, reflecting on the transformation she had witnessed. She realized that she had underestimated Elijah's abilities, initially, not because of any lack of talent on his part, but because of her own assumptions. Watching him lead quietly, help his peers, and maintain his focus had made her reconsider the way she approached teaching. She began to understand that her role was to support every student's growth, to recognize potential even when it was not immediately obvious, and to ensure that biases did not cloud her judgment. The next day, Elijah's group shared their project results with the class. Each student explained their contribution, with Elijah providing guidance but allowing his peers to take ownership of their work. The presentations were impressive, showing creativity, problem-solving, and teamwork. The classmates applauded, and even the students who had been doubtful before expressed respect for what had been achieved. The success of the project was not just in the final results, but in the collaboration, understanding, and growth it represented. Mrs. Reynolds addressed the class again, praising the effort, teamwork, and perseverance she had seen. She highlighted the importance of learning from one another, supporting classmates, and applying critical thinking to challenges. She also subtly acknowledged her own growth as a teacher, recognizing that learning was a continuous process for everyone, including herself. The acknowledgement resonated with the students, reinforcing the lessons of fairness, respect, and open-mindedness. As the weeks went on, Elijah continued to influence the classroom in quiet but meaningful ways. He didn't seek recognition, but his peers looked to him for guidance. His teachers noticed his dedication, and the learning environment continued to improve. Students who had struggled before began participating more actively, demonstrating newfound confidence and curiosity. The classroom became a space where effort and understanding mattered more than appearances or preconceived notions. One afternoon, a particularly difficult concept was introduced. Students groaned quietly, feeling overwhelmed. Elijah approached a few classmates, explaining the idea step by step. He used simple examples, asking questions that helped them think critically. Slowly, the students began to grasp the concept, their expressions changing from confusion to comprehension. When they finally understood, they looked at Elijah with appreciation, realizing that his patience and clarity had made the challenge manageable. Mrs. Reynolds watched quietly, feeling a mix of pride and humility. She realized that she had underestimated not only Elijah but also many other students in the past. The experience had taught her the importance of observing, listening, and encouraging rather than making assumptions. She decided to be more mindful of how she interacted with every student, ensuring that each one had the opportunity to demonstrate their abilities and learn without fear of judgment. Elijah's influence extended beyond academics as well. Students began helping one another more consistently, showing respect and patience. Group activities became more collaborative, with everyone contributing their strengths. The classroom culture shifted from competition to cooperation, and learning became a shared goal. Elijah's example of humility, focus, and steady effort had inspired a broader change that affected every student in the room. By the end of the month, the classroom had transformed significantly. Students were more engaged, more confident, and more willing to support one another. Mrs. Reynolds had learned to check her assumptions, recognize talent regardless of appearance, and value the growth of every student. Elijah continued to excel quietly, guiding his peers without seeking attention or praise. His consistency, dedication, and kindness had created an environment where learning and respect thrived together. The story of Elijah's exam score was no longer just about a single achievement. It had become a lesson for everyone in the classroom, that talent could be found in unexpected places, that effort and focus mattered more than appearances, and that supporting one another could create lasting change. For Elijah, it was another step in his journey of quiet excellence, proving that true success came not just from individual accomplishment, but from inspiring growth and confidence in those around him. As the final bell rang one Friday afternoon, the students left the room chatting excitedly, sharing their successes and discussing what they had learned. Elijah packed his bag and walked down the hallway with calm confidence. unnoticed by many but respected by those who knew him best. The classroom had become a place where effort, understanding, and collaboration mattered more than anything else, and that change had been sparked quietly by a boy who had refused to let doubt define him or his peers. It had been several weeks since the exam, and the atmosphere in Mrs. Reynolds' classroom was completely different. Students were more confident, more willing to participate, and more respectful of each other's ideas. Elijah continued to work quietly, always focused on learning and helping others without drawing attention to himself. His peers had grown to admire him not only for his intelligence but for his calm, patient way of guiding those around him. One morning, Mrs. Reynolds decided to give the class a pop quiz. She wanted to see if students had retained their knowledge and if they could apply it under pressure. As she handed out the papers, she glanced at Elijah, remembering the moment weeks ago when his exam score had left her stunned. She wondered how he would handle this quiz, curious if he would excel again. He received the paper with a quiet nod and immediately began working, his pencil moving steadily across the page. As the students wrote, some whispered to each other, wondering how Elijah would do. He worked quickly but carefully, double-checking his answers without showing any sign of stress or arrogance. His calmness seemed to calm others around him. Some students who usually rushed through questions began to slow down, taking more time to think, inspired by his example. When the quizzes were collected, Mrs. Reynolds felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. She began grading them, expecting to see a range of scores as usual. But when she reached Elijah's paper, she found that once again he had the highest score in the class. The numbers were clear, precise, and impressive. This time, instead of disbelief, there was admiration. She realized that what she had once questioned was the result of dedication, focus, and true understanding. Mrs. Reynolds called Elijah to the front of the classroom again, not out of doubt but to ask him to explain his process. He walked up calmly, greeted her with a polite nod, and began outlining his thought process. He explained each answer carefully, showing the reasoning behind it and how he approached each problem. This time, the class listened not because they were curious about his score, but because they wanted to understand his method. As Elijah explained, some students started asking questions. He answered them patiently, encouraging them to think critically rather than just giving answers. The classroom became a space of learning and curiosity. The other students began to realize that success was not just about raw talent. It was about dedication, patience, and a willingness to understand deeply. Elijah's approach inspired them to try harder and think more carefully about their own work. After class, a few students stayed behind to talk to him. They asked about his study habits, how he stayed focused, and how he dealt with stress. Elijah shared simple advice. Take time to understand. Don't be afraid to make mistakes and help others whenever possible. His words were simple, but they carried weight because they were grounded in experience. The students left feeling motivated and encouraged, seeing that success was achievable through consistent effort. Meanwhile, Mrs. Reynolds reflected on how much she had learned from Elijah. She realized that her initial disbelief had been unfair and rooted in assumptions rather than facts. Watching him work with others, share knowledge, and remain humble had taught her a valuable lesson about patience, fairness, and the importance of giving every student the opportunity to shine. She promised herself that she would be more mindful in the future, recognizing potential and encouraging it rather than doubting it. The days continued with projects, group discussions, and problem-solving activities. Elijah's influence in the classroom grew quietly but steadily. He helped students who were struggling, provided guidance without taking over, and set an example of consistent effort. The class became more collaborative, with students supporting one another and valuing understanding over competition. The atmosphere was no longer tense or doubtful. It was filled with curiosity, respect, and a desire to learn. One afternoon, Mrs. Reynolds assigned a group project that required creativity and critical thinking. Elijah's group was tasked with solving a complex problem that required multiple steps and collaboration. At first, his group members looked unsure, intimidated by the challenge. But Elijah remained calm. He encouraged them to share ideas, think out loud, and work together. Slowly, the group began to take ownership of their work, guided by his quiet leadership. As they worked, challenges emerged. One student struggled with a key concept, another doubted their ability to contribute, and a third hesitated to make decisions. Elijah patiently guided them, asking questions that helped them think critically and find solutions themselves. He didn't give the answers. He encouraged reasoning, problem-solving, and collaboration. When the group finally solved the problem, their excitement and pride were visible. They had accomplished something significant together, and Elijah's guidance had made it possible. After presenting their project to the class, Elijah's group received applause. The success was not just in the solution they presented, but in the teamwork, effort, and understanding that had gone into it. The other students saw the value of collaboration and persistence, inspired by the way Elijah had quietly led his group. Mrs. Reynolds praised the group's work and highlighted the importance of supporting one another, thinking critically and applying knowledge thoughtfully. The following week, a student who had previously struggled approached Elijah privately. She asked him for advice on a particular topic that had been confusing. Elijah explained patiently, breaking the concept down into simple steps and encouraging her to try solving problems on her own. She followed his guidance, and gradually she began to understand. Her confidence grew and she started participating more in class, contributing ideas and asking thoughtful questions. Elijah's quiet mentorship was making a real difference. Mrs. Reynolds noticed the shift in classroom dynamics. Students were more engaged, respectful, and willing to support each other. She realized that Elijah's influence had created a culture of learning that went beyond grades or individual achievement. The classroom had become a place where effort, curiosity, and collaboration were valued above all else. Her initial doubt had been replaced with respect and recognition, and she felt grateful for the lesson Elijah had unwittingly taught her. By the end of the month, the classroom had transformed. Students were working together, asking questions and challenging themselves in ways they had not before. Elijah continued to lead quietly, guiding his peers without seeking attention or praise. Mrs. Reynolds had become a more thoughtful and fair teacher, aware of her own biases and committed to encouraging all students to reach their potential. Elijah's impact extended beyond academics. His patience, humility, and consistency had inspired students to treat each other with respect, to value learning, and to help one another. The classroom had become a community where everyone felt capable of success. Elijah had shown that true achievement was not just about individual excellence, but about fostering growth, understanding, and confidence in others. As the final bell rang one Friday afternoon, the students left the room chatting excitedly, discussing what they had learned and accomplished. Elijah packed his bag quietly, walking down the hallway with the same calm confidence he had always shown. The classroom had been transformed by his presence, and the lessons he had imparted went far beyond any single exam or project. He had taught everyone, including Mrs. Reynolds, that talent, dedication, and humility could inspire meaningful change, and that success was most powerful when shared. The weeks following Elijah's remarkable exam score were filled with small victories and quiet growth. The classroom had completely transformed. Students were participating more, asking questions without fear, and helping each other when challenges arose. Elijah continued to focus on his work, offering guidance to classmates with patience and humility. His calm confidence had become a model for others, and his classmates had begun to see that success was not just about grades but about understanding, persistence, and mutual support. One afternoon, Mrs. Reynolds decided to give a complex assignment that would stretch the students' critical thinking. She handed out the instructions and watched the class react. Some students seemed intimidated, unsure if they could complete the task. Others were excited, ready for the challenge. Elijah received the assignment quietly, reviewing it carefully before beginning. His demeanor remained calm, unshaken by the difficulty of the task. As the students worked, Elijah's classmates occasionally glanced at him, noticing the way he approached problems systematically. He worked with focus, breaking down each step and thinking critically about each solution. A few students whispered to each other, impressed by his calm approach. They realized that tackling challenges with patience and thoughtfulness was often more effective than rushing or guessing. His quiet leadership was having a subtle but significant impact. During the assignment, a student raised a question, unsure how to approach a particular problem. Elijah leaned over, speaking softly but clearly, guiding the student through the reasoning process. He asked questions that led the student to think critically, helping her arrive at the answer herself rather than simply providing it. The student's face lit up as understanding dawned, and she smiled gratefully at Elijah. This small moment reflected the change in the classroom. Learning had become a shared experience, and success was now measured by understanding and collaboration. Mrs. Reynolds observed quietly, feeling a sense of pride and reflection. She had learned a great deal since the day she had doubted Elijah's abilities. She realized that her initial disbelief had been rooted in assumptions, not facts. Watching him guide his peers and maintain humility had shown her the power of quiet leadership and the importance of giving every student a fair chance to shine. She decided to be more mindful in her teaching, ensuring that no student was underestimated or overlooked. As the assignment continued, Elijah's influence extended to the group as a whole. Students who had previously struggled began to participate more actively, asking questions and sharing ideas. They learned not only from Elijah but also from each other, creating an environment where collaboration and critical thinking were valued. The classroom had become a place where students felt safe to explore, make mistakes, and learn, and this shift was largely due to Elijah's example. After the assignment, Mrs. Reynolds called on a few students to explain their solutions. Elijah's group presented their work clearly, demonstrating their reasoning and the steps they had taken to reach the answer. Their presentation was impressive, not because it was flawless, but because it reflected thoughtfulness, teamwork, and genuine understanding. The classmates applauded, and even students who had been skeptical before expressed admiration for the effort and clarity they saw. Following the presentation, some students approached Elijah privately to ask for guidance on topics they still found challenging. He offered advice calmly, explaining concepts step by step and encouraging them to practice and think critically. His patience and humility made him approachable, and the students felt comfortable seeking help. They began to see that learning was not a competition, but a process of growth and support, where everyone could contribute and succeed. Mrs. Reynolds noticed these interactions and felt a sense of pride and humility. She realized that she had been fortunate to witness the transformation of her classroom, both in terms of student engagement and her own growth as a teacher. Elijah had shown her the value of patience, encouragement, and fairness. She vowed to continue fostering an environment where every student had the opportunity to demonstrate their abilities and where learning was shared and collaborative. Over the following weeks, the positive effects continued. Students who had once doubted themselves began taking more risks, participating in discussions and approaching problems with confidence. They started to help each other without being prompted, creating a culture of mutual support and respect. Elijah continued to excel quietly, guiding his peers and modeling consistent effort, humility, and focus. One day, a particularly challenging problem was presented in class. Students groaned, feeling overwhelmed. Elijah approached the problem methodically, breaking it into smaller steps and analyzing each part carefully. Some classmates watched, inspired by his approach, and gradually began to follow his method. By the end of the lesson, most students had solved the problem successfully. The classroom buzzed with a sense of accomplishment, and even the students who had initially felt intimidated were smiling, realizing that persistence and careful thinking could overcome difficult challenges. As the semester progressed, the impact of Elijah's presence became even more evident. Students had grown more confident, collaborative, and curious. They had learned to value effort, understanding, and patience over superficial measures of success. Mrs. Reynolds continued to encourage this environment, recognizing the importance of acknowledging talent, supporting growth, and addressing bias whenever it appeared. The story of Elijah's exam score and his subsequent influence on the classroom became more than a lesson about academics. It became a lesson about character, humility, and the power of consistent effort. Students had learned that talent could be found in unexpected places, that leadership could be quiet and unassuming, and that success was most meaningful when shared with others. Elijah had inspired change not just through his own achievements, but through the way he uplifted his peers and approached challenges with calm determination. As the final weeks of the semester arrived, the classroom had become a space of respect, curiosity, and collaboration. Students who had once doubted themselves now approached learning with confidence. They asked questions, sought guidance, and supported one another. Elijah remained a steady presence, quietly guiding and encouraging without seeking attention or praise. His impact was evident in every interaction and in the culture of the classroom as a whole. When the final bell rang on the last day of the semester, students left the room chatting excitedly, reflecting on their growth and accomplishments. Elijah packed his bag quietly, walking down the hallway with calm confidence. The lessons he had imparted through example, guidance, and humility had created a lasting influence. Mrs. Reynolds watched him go, grateful for the lesson he had unwittingly taught her and the transformation he had inspired in the classroom. Elijah's story was a reminder to everyone that talent and effort often exist in quiet, unassuming ways. True success was not measured by appearances or assumptions, but by dedication, understanding, and the positive impact one could have on others. The classroom had witnessed that change, and the students carried it with them beyond the school walls, inspired to approach challenges with patience, collaboration, and respect. Elijah's quiet strength had transformed not only his own journey, but the journey of everyone around him.